welcome to Amsterdam. How are you today?
Fine, thank you. Thanks for having me. Nice invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I'm really, really looking forward for this conversation. First of all, how did you find the event today?
Well, I think now we're on the third day. It's
Hmm.
a bit more quiet, but yeah, always exciting to meet all these people. I think the great thing about Money 2020 is the whole networking.
Hmm.
Honestly, that's the reason why I come every year.
Yeah, yeah, me too. I think that it seems like every fintech companies in the world are here today. Would you like to start giving us a little bit of your background, your professional background, but most importantly, also about Wero as a company?
Yeah, so I'm with the company or with this whole undertaking, with the European initiative, since it was basically an idea
Hmm.
of a couple of bankers and required, of course, a lot of discussion. And then I had the pleasure to travel around Europe, trying to convince other banks to join to see whether there was even an appetite to create a European payment solution. And yeah, so that's how I was with the company in the beginning. And then when we were fully established, I became the interim CEO and finally the CEO. My background is pretty much in strategy consulting, management consulting in various companies where I did banking, retail banking, and mostly payments, fintech business. And I worked 4 years for a bank.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm German, but I live in Paris and I work in Brussels and in Amsterdam a lot and sometimes in Berlin.
Nice. I would like to start with probably one of the most important questions, and what everyone is asking, in this kind of field. Why it is so important to have a sovereign and proprietary payment system in Europe right now?
Absolutely. I mean, it is, I think, very simple. If you think about it, payments is something that you do once or several times a day. And if you think about the broader picture, if you don't have payments, then you don't have commerce and you won't have an economy. So it's very fundamental to our economic well being, I would say, that we control the payment rails. The whole idea, by the way, started not so much out of the geopolitical context, but really out of the idea that, well, we got into a dependency with a couple of international players, which was quite dominant and difficult, and for the banks at least, very difficult to cope with, but also with the merchants and the acquiring side. So the whole European ecosystem was impacted. The consumer doesn't see it so much or is not so much aware, but all the other players suffer a lot from that dependency. The fact that we are not able to choose when innovations are implemented, even, I mean, the simple choice whether we want them or not. So that's a difficult situation. The whole tariffs and increasing tariffs, not being able to control your own business model, not driving the whole sense, and this vulnerability. What happens if they switch off? What happens if they make a return that we don't want to because we have different objectives in in Europe? So that whole context led to the need to go for a European solution. By the way, it's not the first attempt. There were other ideas like this, like the Money Project.
Yeah.
The good thing about this one, I think, is that it is focused on a digital solution, mobile first, and really trying to bring something new, different, not just another card scheme. A quite different approach. And I think that gives it also a good starting point, I would
Mhm.
say.
First of all, it's very interesting what you're trying to do and what you're trying to build. I was always wondering why we never thought about it before. You've been mentioning the Money Project, for
Yeah.
example, but why do you think those kind of things never worked out in the past, and why this one can actually work now?
Yeah, I think that's a very relevant question, which we should actually consider also in our whole debate with the public authorities. If you think back, and I mean, I was in payments already by that time, the Money Project basically was also stopped by the European
Mhm.
Commission by that time because at that moment, banks were coming together and wanted to create a card scheme. And by that time, the Commission said that the business model was not acceptable. And they had the IFR regulation, and they wanted everybody to comply to these levels. And if you look back, the impact of the IFR regulation was actually reinforcing the duopoly of Visa and MasterCard.
Yeah.
So I think we need to go back in time and reconsider what were the choices, how we drive public policy, the decision making, and what is the impact of the European market. I can tell you right now that the regulation is also quite more difficult for newcomers as we are compared to established players. So we have some issues. So that's why for us, it's also very crucial to stay in close contact with the European regulator and the Commission to underline and to show them what is really the impact of their regulation and why certain things don't work for European market players and what they should consider. Is it, for example, okay that we have some exemptions on card sites, which we don't have for instant payment players? So we have two different levels there, and we need to reconsider this. The whole concept also of what is a level playing field. In Europe, everything is based on that idea, oh, it needs to be level playing field. But what is it when you think about competition and you think about the financial means that some players have? You can put it on a level playing field, but you will never be at the same level because we are just not having the same financial resources. So I think these concepts, which are way broader than just our solution, but for the whole European market, need to be reconsidered in the way how we do politics. And also, if you think payments overall, we don't have an industrial policy for payments as we have, for example, for energy. We consider payments as a subservice, which is there, but not worthwhile to focus on. Now it's becoming a more spotlight topic because everybody cares about the geopolitical context, and all of a sudden everybody is afraid. But it deserves, as an industry sector from the public authorities, way more attention, I think, and would require also more consideration of what does the private sector need to succeed.
Yeah. I think, first of all, it's a very good point to take in consideration the political aspect of this matter. And I also believe that we are in one of those moments in time where, the interest of the payment providers out there, interest of merchants and users actually align with the current, political reaction and political request under that perspective. So maybe we are in the right spot at the right time, in the right place, to make it happen this time. But you made a very, very interesting point about, not having a policy about it.
Yeah.
We do have common policies and European policies about energy, for example. That is a perfect example.
Yeah.
But we don't have anything about payments. We do have something about banking. And even that, is a minimum floor, minimum level. But then every country is anyway independent to put regulation on top of that. So we always went a little bit weird, I would say, under this perspective. So I think that a payment regulation in Europe would be pretty useful under this.
But that's exactly where we also saw the opportunity. When you talk about the regulation, we had the instant payment regulation. Whole Europe implemented it. So we saw there an opportunity, combined with the fact that there is a worldwide trend to account.
Yeah.
So we said, okay, we have now a common standard in Europe, which is our standard, which is purely European infrastructure, and where we have no dependency on American players or Chinese, however. So we can use this to build up a different system, and that's what we did. What we did on top of the European regulation on instant payment is that we said, okay, it regulates what happens between banks, but it doesn't say how it should work with commerce. So we worked out a rule book which addresses especially the whole commerce part. So how do you interact with acquirers, acceptance providers, with the merchants, what are the shares of responsibilities and roles to make it worthwhile. Because otherwise, if you just do instant money transfer, you leave too much uncertainty what happens in case of fraud and so on. So we took that standard, said, great, we have a common basis, whole Europe is working on it, good for us. It's corresponding to a broad European and worldwide trend, this whole account-to-account stuff. And we leverage that and try to make it really a full-fledged alternative to cards and even beyond, because we do P2P, we do different ways of functioning. We do QR code, we do contactless. So a broader scope, more services, and combine it with a wallet. Because if you look at international trends, the other big thing, which is really driving innovation, are wallets. So that's why at the end we are a strange animal, because we are a payment mean, but we are also a wallet, an ecosystem. So it's corresponding to this maturity that we see now and that we would like to leverage, because we see a lot of opportunity there. We always think that people, they're happy with what they have here, but actually they're also very keen to get new stuff, and they are still not fully satisfied with what they have. And if you deep dive into their needs, you find out that there is a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I think it reflects a lot the kind of trends that we see in the market,
Yeah.
So if you take a look, for example, at what is happening in Southeast Asia, they were using wallets and they were using
Yes.
peer-to-peer and QR codes way before that
Yes.
we do. If you take a look, for example, in what happening in the US,
Yes.
payment method like Venmo or Cash App, they were way more common than, that what we have right now. So taking in consideration all of that, how important do you think it is to have interoperability between those kind of systems? You've been mentioning
Yes.
QR code, wallets. How important it is to have an umbrella that cover everything, I would say.
Well, the interoperability that you mentioned is for us a mean to cover Europe as soon as possible. So that is clearly with this sovereignty focus. Because we think that it is important that as soon as possible in Europe we can cover all these markets with all the basic use cases, so P2P, e-commerce, but also point of sale. And that's what we are trying to achieve in the cooperation that we have with the other digital solutions, and where I think very soon we will see other solutions joining. But I mean, then immediately afterwards, we also need to think about what happens beyond Europe, because people travel. They don't just stay in the European area. So we have to cater for what happens next. And there it's very interesting to see that all these regional or national other solutions are also thinking about this. So we have to think about a broader interoperability framework, I would say, the long run, if we really want to have an alternative to cards, and if we want to make it not just very attractive for domestic usage, but a full-fledged alternative. Because otherwise, we have to recognize that the acceptance network is the most difficult thing to achieve worldwide, especially, and even in a broader European landscape. So that is where interoperability can play a good role, because you can cater then for mutual acceptance, at least allowing that, consumers do their payments when they travel. And that is what I think would be a next step.
And how are you trying to achieve that? Because having the interoperability from a technical perspective is a challenge, but
Yes.
under the same point of view, you need to talk with those companies. You need to
Mhm.
accept different kind of means. And I think that you are trying to do that with partnership, but I would
Yes.
love to hear it from you.
Yeah, it requires that you align on a minimum functioning, which indeed is easier with account to account than it is, for example, with cards, because cards come a lot with technical standards, kernels, etc. So you have an easier basis there, but let's be also honest, it's not easy to achieve common ground, to say, okay, how does it really work? How do you show consumers that here they can pay while they are not in their home market? How do you present this in the app that a consumer would be using, and so on? I think it requires these exchanges among solutions. Everybody has to do some changes. So it's not coming like, oh, it's just a political agreement and then off we take. No, it's operational changes, alignment that you need to achieve. And yeah, on the broader perspective, on the international perspective, it still remains to be defined. But as you know, there are projects like the Nexus
Yeah.
project, which is going into that direction. And I think we need to take that to a broader level, to an international level now, because worldwide there are more than 60 account to account solutions, which are in most of the cases very successful
Mhm.
and show that, yeah, they are, I think, successful also because you can do more than cards. You can do invoice payments, you can do P2P,
Yeah.
you can do P2 Pro without having terminals and so on. So I think they're very attractive, but yeah, there is still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think that what stuck with me the most is the kind of velocity that you get, in order to build everything that you're building right now. So, how many users are actually using Vero at the moment?
We are now at 55 million users that are officially activated in the solution. So this year we will have on top, well, the migration of the Netherlands coming and of Luxembourg. So the Netherlands, the Dutch migration of Ideal will continue until end of next year. But this whole, Dutch Luxembourgish movement will bring another 15 million users.
Wow.
So, and yeah, we are talking also to other markets like Austria. So this gives an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But for us, of course, the other big focus point right now is the rollout in commerce, in e-commerce, but soon also the first cases point of sale, where we start in Belgium and go on in Luxembourg, but then quickly also in other markets. So, and we want to get to account-to-account payment in a contactless mode, so leveraging NFC next year. So a lot of commercial rollout activities, onboarding of merchants, and maybe an interesting number that many people don't have on their radar screen is that, yeah, we have, as you know, 16 shareholders, which are all members.
Yep.
But beyond that, now we have 50 enrolled companies, meaning banks and acquirers, who have gone through the whole onboarding process and who are rolling out to their clients the solution. 50 in Europe, and if you look at the names, all the big names are there. So it's a very good coverage, I would say, because it really allows us now to go beyond the markets where we are and to offer, especially on the merchant side, this one-stop integration. A merchant that works with us needs one integration for all markets that we cover. And I think that is what we really want to establish now.
Yeah. You've been mentioning in the beginning that part of your work is actually to go out there and speaking with banks and
Yeah.
speaking with stakeholders to
Yeah.
convince them about, the necessity of this. I was wondering, what was the reaction in the beginning from banks? Because it's
Yeah.
never easy to convince a bank to do something, but I would like to understand how they reacted, when you actually proposed something like this.
For me, it's a funny question because indeed I've seen all kind of reactions.
I can
I
imagine.
think one day I should write a book because it's very diverging depending on the markets. A lot of hesitation, indeed, if not hostility in the first place, because you come like, oh, you want to impose the system of a different market. But, if you look at, for example, our board, it's really European. I very much appreciate the discussions that take place there. All these shareholders, they are not driven by a short-term perspective because they all know it will take time. It's not an easy undertaking, but it is worthwhile. We really get something out of it for Europe and for the business of the players. I think for once, at least I have this strong conviction and I see it day by day. I think we're doing really something concrete for Europe. And on the same time, we're making sure that this is a sustainable business. It's a viable business case and that we can achieve something there. So Um, Banks, when they first hear about it, they're always critical, challenging. But how would you do this? And why should I join? And what's in for me? And this is long, this is difficult. But you see, when they get into it, when they get all the details, when they see the functioning, the UX, they get interested. It's usually a long process to convince. Also, because banks have investment committees and all these structures you have to go through. It's a financial investment. They need to adapt their systems. Sometimes they have the question, do I need to give up my national system or not? Are they willing to do it? It requires per market alignment.
Mm-hmm.
So that is one of the most difficult aspects because many banks are individually interested, but maybe not their full market. So often they have to convince their peer banks in their own market. So it takes time. It takes time to convince. There's also sometimes some kind of nationalism there.
Yeah.
That's, by the way, we all know it. Our biggest problem in Europe is this whole fragmentation that we have, and especially in payments. So, but overarchingly, the idea to say, well, together we are stronger. Together we can have financial means pooling, mutualization, which makes a lot of sense. Because individually, whether it's at the level of each individual big bank or at their national markets, nobody can pull together enough money today to compete internationally. We can only do that together as Europeans. And I think that's an interesting and convincing story. And by the way, also the effect of learning from each other. Every market has some interesting use cases, patterns, experiences, and bringing this together is actually super powerful.
Yep.
I appreciate, for example, we learn from markets like Luxembourg, invoice payments.
Yep.
More than 80% in Luxembourg are paid with QR code. Interesting. Would that not be nice for other markets, or
The same
integrating other alternative payment means into the wallet, because then you have more usage, like meal vouchers in Belgium, or, or the great experience of Ideal in the Netherlands. So I think that bringing all this together really leverages our European knowledge and whatever we have experienced so far. And let's not be shy. I mean, things like the chip on the card were invented in Europe, not elsewhere. So I just think that we need to focus and align and get a bit away from all that fragmentation, and then we can make it happen.
Yeah, I do agree. I think that sometimes we lack a little bit the ability of sell ourselves.
Yeah.
We have some very interesting examples of quality in terms of payments in Europe. I'm thinking, for example, of Bizum in Spain, for example, of Satispay in Italy.
Yeah.
But we are not good as, for example, Americans, though, on selling themselves.
Yeah.
And that fragmentation right now is real because you cannot use the same kind of payment method that we have in Spain, in Italy, or vice versa, of course. And I think that putting all of that together will not just make us stronger internally, but also when we speak externally and when we speak with external stakeholders in the US, Southeast Asia, in Africa, and everywhere else. So I think that something like this is a necessary step that maybe not everyone was, ready or willing to take. But, the kind of geopolitical scene that we have right now is pushing us in that direction, I think.
Yes. But I think we have to distinguish. Geopolitics, of course, are at the political level. But on the other side, I mean, from the other systems or from merchants in other markets, there is a clear interest. I was very surprised to see that in the very beginning, when we launched, immediately we got marks of interest from big American merchants saying, if you go ahead, we want to accept you. Because they see the interest and they really also would like to have that alternative. So I think there is definitely a willingness internationally to cooperate. And that is besides the whole geopolitics. So, and I don't want to close that door. Of course, we want to cooperate with the rest of the world,
Yeah.
but we want to do it on equal terms and not in a dependency or in a different role. We would like to continue to exchange with other markets, with other solutions, and that's what we are aiming for.
No, I totally agree with that. I was wondering, we have been talking about the reaction of banks, but what about the reaction of merchants?
Yeah,
You've been mentioning
yeah,
one. How did they take this? Is it something that they were looking for
yeah.
or they wanted to have?
They absolutely and very strongly want to have an alternative to cards.
Mm,
There are many who have doubts that card will be the long-term
mm,
system. Some are just tactical to say,
okay.
I want to have both, which I can also
Makes sense.
understand, to diversify. They want to have a leverage point in order not to be too dependent on card fees and to have alternatives. They also want to have solutions that work better in their own apps for big merchants, for example, and that allow, for example, cashing in a different mode. If you scan a QR code, you don't need a cash register.
Hmm.
So that's also very interesting for merchants.
Yep.
And of course, in our system, in our ecosystem, what is very important is to listen to what the merchants want, for example, in terms of value-added services, how they want to prioritize certain features and so on. So, because we are very much convinced that in Europe, we only have a chance if we align on a European level with the whole ecosystem and not, well, the banks against the rest. That will never work.
Hmm.
So aligning with the acquirers, aligning with the merchants, and understanding why they want certain things, what can be the middle ground of compromise, because it's also always a question of who pays for what really is most important, consumer needs, merchant needs. You need to cater for both. So this kind of compromise is what you need to achieve.
Mm. Maybe last question from my side, also taking in consideration our time, unfortunately. I was thinking, we have been talking about different kind of payment methods. We have been talking about the reaction of, the players in the ecosystem and the geopolitical side. So doing all of these is not easy because you have to take in consideration many different kind of, inputs out there. So I was wondering, how important do you think it is to be resilient in the payment method systems in the payment markets right now?
I think it's super important because of the geopolitical context, right? If we would not have that, let's call it threat, we could be maybe more relaxed on a couple of topics. But no, we have to pay attention to this. But we also have to be honest to ourselves and to the market, which is, we are very dependent on US players
Yeah.
in certain areas. In our company, we had a lot the debate about the cloud, which provider to choose. Luckily, now there are more European providers
Yeah.
out there, and it's evolving quickly. But look at our mobile phones. Our mobile phones are not European
Yeah.
anymore. We had
They
Nokia
are,
before,
of
but they
course.
are
Yeah.
not anymore. And so we have to be honest in this regard and can only work towards resilience. And really also that's where we think we also need the industrial policy focus. What is really needed to get to this highest level of resilience? But resilience is only one aspect. We also need to be competitive.
Yeah.
I sometimes have the impression that people got stuck into resilience and believe that, well, that's it. And as long as we are resilient, we can solve it. The consumer in the street will not choose a payment method. Oh, is that the resilient one? He wants the easy one, the convenient one, the
Yeah.
nice one, if possible, the funny one. So we need to be competitive and resilient and coping for the two aspects and not just get obsessed by, is this resilient or not? Because anyhow, we are not at the time being. Let's be clear about this.